When the storm hit and the flooding began, I was terrified. I have had panic attacks because of my climate anxiety and climate trauma.
It would be impossible to overstate the impact that climate change, unchecked, will have on our mental health.
Experts predict that climate change could have an increasing impact on our mental health and put us more at risk of developing anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. That's because climate change is making extreme weather events like hurricanes, wildfires, and flooding more likely. These events can be terrifying and traumatizing.
Typhoon Vamco is the 21st cyclone to hit the Philippines this year. We've seen families on the roofs of their homes trying to avoid the rising water level.
In November 2020, Typhoon Vamco battered the Philippines, causing mass flooding. Heavy rain turned the streets of the capital, Manila, into rivers. At least 67 people died.
During the last typhoons, this river went all the way up to the top of this bridge. During Typhoon Vamco, I was outside when my mom called me and she told me, "Mitzi, don't come home. The roads to our house are flooded." When the storm hit and the flooding began, I was terrified. I didn't know if there was a home to come home to. I didn't know if my mom was alive or okay.
Experts say these extreme weather events, made more likely by climate change, can cause climate-related trauma. For example, a study by the University of Alberta found that adults who were caught up in the costliest wildfire disaster in Canada's history experienced increased rates of mental health problems. The Fort McMurray fires in 2016 particularly affected young people, with a third of 12 to 18-year-olds experiencing PTSD and depression 18 months after the fire. Helen Berry is an honorary professor of climate change and mental health at the University of Sydney.
You can divide weather-related disasters into two kinds, chronic and acute. And they tend to have different pathways of influence on mental health. So a classic example of a chronic weather-related disaster is a drought. Those kinds of disasters tend to grind and wear people down, and they tend to be more related with what are called mood disorders, depression, where we get really down. Cyclones and floods and fires, wildfires that get out of control. Those are acute disasters. They happen quickly. They go on intensely, usually for a very short period of time. You do see a spike in mental health problems immediately. So across the board, you get increased rates of general psychological distress, anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, suicide, ideation. When you're evacuated for a long period of time, so your home has been completely destroyed by floods and winds in a cyclone, then the risk to your mental health is extreme.
Experiencing typhoons like Vamco has seriously impacted Mitzi's mental health.
This is my room. I would sometimes wake up in this very bed and I would find that my room has been flooded. The floods would sometimes reach here. These extreme weather events impact my mental health in a way that I don't even know how to understand. Having the experience of wading through floods and seeing children's clothes floating and toys floating and not knowing if the owners of those toys and clothes are still alive, that changes you in a way. I have had panic attacks, having a fear that I would drown in my own bedroom. Even just talking about it now is difficult. It makes me feel hopeless and like life isn't worth living. That's why we have to talk about climate trauma, so that people understand that the climate crisis is already here and it needs to be dealt with today.